Okay, well, hey, Steve Phelan, welcome to Reasonably Rational. Thanks for joining us. Since this is your first time on the show, maybe you can start with a little bit of an autobiography. Introduce us to
Sure.
Steve Phelan, who he is, where he came from, his major musical influences, if that seems appropriate, and then, how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, music would be a wormhole, so we'll stick with the
Okay, that's
autobiography.
the next conversation.
Catholic family, intact one, thankfully, and very blessed in this family that we had. 3 siblings, at least a couple of them. Very Catholic upbringing. Dad was a deacon, so that was a big part of how we were raised. Though it didn't take. Getting it to take took a little bit longer. For me, that happened later on in my 20s and came back when my brother Mike gave me a C.S. Lewis book.
Oh,
And I learned at the age of 27 we were supposed to think about our faith. That was actually encouraged.
which C.S. Lewis book?
It was one of these daily reading compilations.
Oh,
You know,
okay,
it's-
okay. All
So, but Mere Christianity was the one that really kind of jumped out from there. And a few months later, I'd burned through everything, and that was again a very slow turn. I'm a slow convert or revert in this case. So here in Arizona, spent some time wasting time with a lifestyle that it was just wasting time. I wasn't as bad as I could have been. I just didn't want it enough.
Yeah.
So still very blessed with the family we had and a lot of good friends. End up at a certain point after my reversion working with a home for pregnant moms here in town. And I was already developing what my wife now calls my philosophical tendencies. But then it was just the work. We're building houses, we're serving women who are sort of in rough situations and kind of creating a place of protection and safety for them. And it was very Catholic in its ethos. It was just Catholic from the ground up. And that made me think about some things in a different way. The place also had its identity struggles. There was what we now recognize as sort of a deep tension between sort of a social justice and certain people that want to sort of lay a political thing on top of it, which it didn't have on its own. So it's just a beautiful ministry and flourished. It's still flourishing now. It's going great. But over a couple years I was there, I realized like at a certain point, I was not well educated. I didn't know how to think my way through these things. So I'm going to Franciscan University, getting a master's in philosophy. And my thesis, I actually stayed on track with my thesis, was to work on the meaning of social justice. Like, what is this thing? Why do we use that terminology? Why is the language of social justice so ill-fitting to what we were trying to do? I wasn't ready to, and I still don't reject the language of social justice, but I didn't understand the tensions at the time. And so I came out of there, got married to Diane. We got married in Pittsburgh, South Hills area, and I got a job with Human Life International. And that was really a confluence of these impossible to politicize things, the pro-life movement, pro-family thing, and very much this sort of international development, social justice framed vision of a lot of things. So we did a lot of international development adjacent work, but we were always preaching the fullness of the truth from the church's perspective. And that's when working with Human Life International, we started having our own family. So living at home, not being the best dad I could be all the time, but learning as we went. And in my professional life, I was working with some heroic people in Africa, in the Philippines, in South America, Central America, and Europe. There's people who were in full apostolic mode. Before, that's what we would call it, and others in the pro-life movement. Got to know a lot of people there. And that was, again, an extended, sort of like a more fuller version of my reversion to the faith. You had to live it, and you had to know what the church was talking about. And so I guess that's between working at the Home for Pregnant Moms and then working in the international development space and in this missionary work we were doing. Had a lot of opportunities to grow in my faith and a lot of opportunities to say, what are we doing here as Catholics, and how are we engaging in these things?
Were there sort of specific moments along the path in that journey? I mean, I guess beginning with the reversion, but specifically as you started to focus academically on the question of social justice, the church's social doctrine. And then actually, the rubber meets the road with Human Life International. It had already begun with your work, with the homes for pregnant mothers here. Were there certain sort of key moments that you can recall looking back on it where something concrete that you were either doing or brushing up against in your work kind of just made something on the academic side or the reading and studying side just kind of click into place, like, yeah, okay, what I'm seeing here, what I'm doing here is exactly what that paragraph or that statement or that idea means when it's lived, when it's applied, when it takes on flesh?
Wow, big question. Well, first of all, I had to learn the how-to of philosophy. And for me, it was always about language. It was the language of social justice that I didn't understand when we were using it and doing it. It just didn't seem to match. So I'd go study philosophy, and I was always drawn towards the more linguistic focused thing. So of course you have plenty of Aquinas. Franciscan University, you get Aquinas, though you also get a lot of the Continental there. It's kind of the big battle for philosophy nerds out there, the sort of Continental phenomenological school, and the Thomists. There were a lot of battles where nobody ever got hurt.
They're just the image of a battle of philosophy nerds that's a delightful image to let your imagination.
Oh, sure.
A lot of thick glasses and
yeah, there was a lot
mismatched outfits.
A lot of heated conversations, but a lot of light too. It wasn't just heat; it was light, and it was fruitful conversations that we had. And I came out of there interestingly. The strongest connection I had was with a teacher. His name's John Sanford. He's at UD now.
Okay.
And he both inspired me to work on these particular questions, and also because he had a photographic memory and knew everything from Nietzsche to Aquinas. I was also like, maybe I'm not a pro, but I've learned here. And he really challenged me in a lot of ways, between him and Dr. Crosby especially. They really brought a lot of interesting, even sources you wouldn't necessarily associate with Franciscan University. For Dr. Crosby's class, we did a text course on John Searle, who's a materialist philosopher out of Berkeley. Yeah. Who, it was great. We actually, after we studied his texts for one class, he came and talked to us, just our little class of 12.
Oh,
so we
really?
had this world famous philosopher in this little room.
Wow.
And these Franciscan kids kind of plugging away and try to find out where he's coming from. And he apparently didn't know he was talking to Catholics, which was funny. Because at one point he was like, and there's a lot of Catholicism in the questions, or at least in the background of the questions. And at one point he said, well, it's kind of like with those apparitions. I mean, nobody really believes that anymore. Nobody's waiting for those things anymore, right? And there was a little pause, and I think we took a water break. I think Dr. Crosby, like, let's just take a little break. We'll come back here. And
at Franciscan, I'm surprised someone didn't raise their hand. Like, I had an apparition last night at the Portiuncula Chapel praying my rosary.
Well, we were learning from Dr. Crosby to be discreet and, respectful. And he was a guest. But it was great. And he came back, and at a certain point, he realized he was at a Catholic school. And he goes, oh, no, I love Catholics. Matter of fact, the Vatican had me out a few years ago, and we talked, and they wanted to find out my ideas about materialism and free will, and because his ideas are really inconvenient for materialism. That was one of the interesting things about him. And he was really honest in the way he pursued them. But so we all said, really? Pope Benedict? Did you meet him? He goes, no, the guy before that, whoever that was. So Pope John Paul II then. Yeah, that guy. So it was great. So there's a lot of experiences like that. They were a lot of fun. I ended up, in the end, studying on a sort of a dialogue between John Paul II and Alistair McIntyre on human action. And so that's when the language we use to describe action, and there's another philosopher named Elizabeth Anscombe, who I discovered late, who really nails the really important questions, I think. Like, how do we describe what we do? The language we even use about intention, and how we talk about, like, oh, I meant to do that. Did you really? If you meant to do that, for example, would you have proceeded the way you did? And it's just the way it kind of requires a real honesty. So that part of philosophy I found really interesting and fruitful. And actually, it informed my work in communications in the international pro-life movement, though it probably took me a year or two to dial the master's student stuff back out of my regular communication stuff. Like, do you really need that word? Come on, can we back it out a little bit? So yeah, it definitely had a role, and I think for me it was Wojtyła, McIntyre, and Anscombe, and they still come up in the way I think about and read about.
Yeah, those are great thinkers to be bringing along to your life and your work. This whole question of social justice, international aid is, of course, in the news right now since the second Trump administration took over. The whole USAID question, that question, whether most Catholics know it or not, ripples into a whole bunch of Catholic circles as well, where the whole international aid, the poverty relief, et cetera, kind of stuff is concerned. You've worked in and with and around Catholic social justice. I don't know if institutions is the way to say it, but institutions in the church, entities in the church, or at least allegedly connected to the church that are in this business, to use the vulgar term for it. For run-of-the-mill Catholics who maybe are somewhat aware that there's something that the church does in these areas and that there's probably some activity of the church anywhere that you find human need, what are kind of some of the aid institutions in the church, and why does this whole kind of USAID and USAID and international aid question touch on some of those institutions as well?
Sure. Yeah, it's another big question. There are many, obviously, there's many domestic and international Catholic ministries. And as we've seen over the years, there's been sort of a transition from Monsignor Shea and the folks around him. They talk about this transition. It's not just like the times are changing, but it's a change of epochs. And the church is central to what's going on. So a lot of people have been operating for a long time in what you might call Christendom mode, where you can assume with some degree of safety or consistency that the institutions, the language, the sort of social assumptions, the mythic vision that you're dealing with is Christian in all these invisible ways. But that's actually been unraveling for a long time. I mean, in ways, it goes back centuries, back to the fall, back through all these philosophers from Scotus to Bacon to all these other folks, this rock skipping through time and in the ways that the language has sort of been deconstructed a little bit. And then how the church, which built so much of Western society, has slowly been unraveling in those things, even though so many of the traditions and institutions continue, a lot of the underlying assumptions change. So it can be the same thing over time. And in the international development space, which is where we worked, we'd bump into lots of different Catholic institutions. Some of them were just hand in glove. Like, obviously, we're here to preach the gospel of life. We want you to know that these are the things that are coming from the United States, and we don't all believe this, but we want you to have hope. We want you to understand what's going on, that these people who are introducing these teachings, this sort of radical sex education, contraception, abortion, the sort of package deal that we've become inured to in the United States was brand new in a lot of these places and totally contrary to the culture. So we were trying to help people understand that the natural goods of family, the things that were still very strong in, for example, Africa and large parts of South and Central American parts of Asia, these are the goods that you build on. You don't compromise. Like, even if you get all this condescending tone from the West, this is how we did it. And they come with lots of money. And they come with lots of sort of incentives to sort of change how you teach things in your classroom, change how the medical clinic down the street operates, what's on the shelves, to change how people talk in media and radio. Like, they spend tons of money for this long-term mind change to get people to adopt what John Paul II and some others called the contraceptive mentality.
Right.
This idea that when there's a problem with regard to poverty, it's the poor person that's the problem. It's a complete abandonment of the Christian worldview, but people didn't see it because it happened so slowly. So a lot of the Catholic institutions that we saw as we worked had adopted the new mentality. They were still Christian, they were still Catholic. A lot of people meant well. We didn't, we're always trying to understand where each other's coming from. A lot of them did good work, but slowly over time, the foundations had changed. lots of little compromises, like the same thing that we all see in our own lives. If we make compromises, it just gets easier to walk the path of compromise.
Yeah, of
The
course.
same is true with these institutions. And so it can happen slowly over time. And before you know it, for example, if I can, I don't know if you had an idea, if I could be specific about one
Please.
that's
Yeah,
been in the news
yeah,
lately.
absolutely. Absolutely.
The big news lately has been USAID.
Mm-hmm.
And people are just starting to find out. A lot of people kind of knew this, but it just became explicit, like how much it was not about aid.
Right.
And it never was.
Yeah.
It did aid. It uses aid as a sort of soft control component for the United States. So we're not going to bomb everybody, but we will do these. We'll give you some aid, but we need you to stop having kids.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been the USAID mandate for actually almost since the beginning. The precursor that started after the Marshall Plan, basically World War II, Europe was just broken. And a lot of the existing superstructure, or I guess you'd call it that, it was still very Catholic. So if you wanted to rebuild things, you wanted to find out people to have the natural connections where you could just show up and help, you would talk to the Catholic Church. So this connection became really strong between the United States and their own national connections. So you could take collections from Catholics in the pews, it would go through this entity, and you would help develop or rebuild Europe.
And this is, Steve, this is the case because the church basically for 2,000 years now has been the Matthew 25 church. So everywhere there's need, everywhere there's trouble, the church is always there. So in the wake of World War II, there's kind of this network of Catholic presence and this
Right.
network of Catholic influence, which is almost like, the Roman roads in the ancient world. Well, the Romans built this interlocking series of that. Just this is how the gospel moves through the ancient world.
Exactly.
And so the Catholic Church has sort of done this now. It's made inroads over the centuries into every corner of the world. And so now this is naturally the easiest way to get the Marshall Plan, the work that needs to be done, the aid that's needed, to where it needs to go.
Right. And it made a lot of sense. There's logic to it.
Yeah.
And you could take collections from Catholics in the pews here. A lot of them had deep personal, familial connections, like just one or two generations removed, a lot of deep, heartfelt connections. And the government could collaborate with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't what you see today, this real hostility that you've seen last couple generations, this very strong, concerning radical secularism in our government. At the time, there was still basically, again, Christendom. Like a lot of the assumptions were still there. So the collaboration, they had to move dynamically and do a lot of different things. And a group that came out of that was Catholic Relief Services, or what is now Catholic Relief Services. And they did a lot of that coordination. They cared for like Polish refugees. There's a book from CRS that goes through their whole history, and it's really Catholic. It's like really the way that Polish refugees had to escape down through the Soviet Union, and many came to the United States and Mexico, and like you made things happen. You had to innovate. You had to get aid from here to here. So I mean, it's a very natural place for the church to be involved in caring, especially for Christians, for our fellow Catholics, but not exclusively, never exclusively, but the preferential angle makes some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so it developed organically out of the post-World War II era. And that's sort of when the whole idea of aid and development started growing. So 40s, 50s, 60s. At the same time, there was a transition happening from the early 20th century, which was something that I think a lot of people are ashamed of now. We look back at it now, and eugenics, though, at the time was the intellectual fashion.
Right.
Conservatives, liberals, everybody thought at some point that there was a mandate to improve the race. And which is, again, it's so ugly to us now, but at the time it was like scientific, not just fact, but not just the is of science, but the ought of science.
Yeah.
Science in its positive, productive form shouldn't just know these things about genetics, but we need to take this scientific mandate to purify the race. Mm-hmm. Again, ugly concept, but it reigned at the time. So that came out of Britain. Marie Stopes, Margaret Sanger here in America, and a lot of elites were backing it. It made its way all the way through our institutions, and I'm trying to think of the court cases. I can't. Oliver Wendell Holmes is now a very revered conservative jurist, but he was this stuff is in Supreme Court decisions here in the United States. And so it was all the way through society. We kind of forget that now because it was so ugly, but it really was. And then at a certain point in the 40s and 50s, the Rockefellers, the people who were backing these things, between the UK, there was Planned Parenthood's journal, I forget that, the International Birth Control Review. So they published things from like the early Nazis and everybody who was trying to purify the race. But over time, the ugliness of it started to bubble up, and it became not genetics and racial things, but population control. The world was going to become overpopulated, and that was the fashion in through the 60s and the 70s. So when the Pope issued Humanae Vitae in 1968, the pressure on the Vatican at the time was enormous.
Right.
And there was a lot of people even inside the church who wanted and expected the change and were baffled when Pope Paul VI said, actually, no, the church can't do this because the church has the proper anthropology. The church knows what these things are. And by the way, with these predictions that he makes in Humanae Vitae 17, we know what's going to happen if this becomes widely accepted. So no, the church is not going to bless this. So huge explosion, but that's like the sort of heyday of population control mentality. And it takes shape in a lot of different places. In Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb came out soon after, or around the same time. And it's embarrassing now to read that thing.
Right.
All the
So
dire
wildly
predictions that didn't
off,
come
yeah.
true. And
Right.
it's ridiculous.
It's fascinating too that Humanae Vitae, one of the predictions is that eventually governments will use contraception in coercive ways.
Right.
And that's exactly what you're describing, having experienced in the whole business of international aid, that it's like, yeah, you need wells, you need schools, you need water sanitation, so we'll do all that stuff.
Actually, that's a good point. I guess I kind of get lost in the history and the thinking of it sometimes. But by the 60s, those had joined. What we now call USAID was formed in 1961. And one of its key tenets, like the third key tenet, was population control. They say it. There was
already in 61.
Yeah, there was no shame to it then. It was still like the common thinking, like we know the world's going to get overpopulated. The U.S. has an interest here. It's not aid, USA aiding the world. It's international development. So we think it's about aid. It's not about aid. Aid was only ever a tool in its toolbox. So that's really important to understand about how USAID works, why it was created, and like its metaphysics, like what it is. It's an instrument of U.S. soft power. It's not the military. Right. It's not the bombs and guns. It's the soft part. So that's what they started doing, and it continued through the 70s. In 1972, there was a document produced by Henry Kissinger and his team under Nixon. So again, conservatives, right? Where they produced this document called NSSM 200. It's a security memorandum, and it's on the USAID website, or it was until Musk and company pulled it down a couple weeks ago.
The whole website, yeah.
Yeah, it's gone. Like you look it up now, it's just gone. But it was there the entire time. Even after it was declassified in the 90s, written in 1972, declassified in, I think, 94. And it says it's about population control. The U.S. has an interest in these countries, in their minerals, in their natural resources. And we can't just go and throw the military in there, so we need to find out a way to have access to those things. Our number one concern is population. They named 14 countries. Nigeria is one of them. I should have read it before we came here, but I think Philippines is one. But again, 14 countries, we need to control our populations. It simply won't do, though, to have the white man telling people of color in the Southern Hemisphere to stop having babies. So what we can do is have aid. We can do this through the soft power of the United States.
So basically then USAID is international development according to the United States' interests, economically,
right,
militarily, socially, like you said, not the bombs and guns and planes and tanks version of it, but we're constantly advancing our interests internationally by developing, but we're developing and pushing development in ways that basically work to our advantage in the long and the short term. That's because when I first, knowing nothing about this personally, when I first saw the headlines about USAID, it says aid right in the title. So I was like, oh, that's like the aid. Like,
everybody thinks
the
that.
United States we have got big hearts and deep pockets. We're everywhere helping people.
It's
and
free
making
wells and mosquito nets and food and
totally. That's totally what I thought. Okay, so that's super helpful. I had a deep misconception, which apparently I share with many other people about what exactly.
And
it is.
it's important. Like that stuff really happens. That's
Right.
part of the what of USAID. It's not the why.
Yeah.
The why is U.S. interests. And the U.S. interest, while these things were being built, was all about population and U.S. access to things. So if we're worried about political instability, we might use the CIA to take out a ruler, put in another guy. We learned over time that the new guys were often not better than the old guys. So apparently, maybe we still do it. I don't know. But the soft part of that thing, and again, it's often hand in glove with CIA and these other groups. But and now it ends up being a $40 billion kitty that nobody knows where it goes. So that's what they're actually unplugging right now. And I think if they get around to it, they're going to release not just the stuff having to do with the troubling things around the more recent years involving LGBTQ, publishing or backing like drag shows, like all this nonsense that's been coming out.
Yeah.
They're going to find the population control stuff. And it's rife with it. That is the why of USAID. It was to control the rest of the world through soft power and through nice stuff, if need be. That was their purpose. So again, back 60s, 70s, the church was still the church. There's some overlap. You need some nice things done. The church can do that. Church has networks in the Southern Hemisphere and Latin America and in Asia and in Africa. So those are powerful networks. So why don't we collaborate on these things? But the why was already there. USAID, UK aid. There's Germany, Holland. Everybody has their version of these things. But USAID called the shots because we had the most money.
Right.
And at the same time, these enormous NGOs, actually that came more in the 90s and 2000s, like the Gates Foundation. They were kind of later in the picture. But this kind of machine of the U.S. controlling the rest of the world, not always through military. It's bad PR. You can't be everywhere at once, but we're going to tell you how to live. And the main thing you need to do is stop having kids. So here's some mosquito nets. Here's some wells. You need some food? Great. But what we need you to do is to stop having kids. So we're also going to have some people come and talk to you about these things, and we're going to open some clinics here. Then they're going to do abortion. If that's illegal in your country, that's fine. We'll say that they do post-abortion care, but we know what's going on. So between USAID, they give some money to the dictator, which is almost always part of the picture. He has to pay off his people. Then you get some access to the rest of the country. And what you're doing there is mosquito nets and contraception. That's just what it is. That was the U.S. interest there. So that evolved through the 60s and 70s and 80s. Population control eventually it fell out of favor. So what happened, what we started calling it was aid and development. Again, that started in the 60s too, but that became sort of the guiding paradigm and language of it. And also reproductive health. So late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
But reproductive health was necessarily, again, part of the whole machine.
That euphemism that covers contraception, abortion,
the whole thing.
Yeah.
For the people funding CRS and the other groups who were involved in this, for them, it isn't necessarily marveled. CRS doesn't have to accept abortion. I'm not saying that they do. Their partners all do, and CRS over time was doing this good work.
And CRS again is Catholic
Relief Services.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
I guess I didn't set that up.
No, I think you said it right, but just to clarify that we're talking about kind of the main arm of Catholic aid internationally in the United States. Catholic Relief Services that's the main player in terms of the church going international with aid. And so they're actually, from the beginning, when maybe this was a little bit purer on their end, they're partnering with government agencies like USAID to do this stuff. And so what's is this something where is it something where, so USAID and other such institutions of other governments are approaching the church to, let's piggyback on your networks, just sort of like the carrier rides the cell phone towers of the other carrier kind of thing, in order to do this more efficiently. And then CRS and other Catholic agencies from other countries are going to do kind of the clean and nice part of this. And then what happens, were they aware from the beginning? Have they become aware of the fact that behind the nice stuff that they're doing up front, they're digging a well, they're building a school?
That's an important question. I can't get inside anybody's heads. I don't want to assume the worst about a person. Sure. I barely know what's going on with my kids, what they're thinking sometimes. So I don't want to say, especially over time, I assume most of the people meant well. I assume most of them really believed that these big aid, whatever you call them, this big machine of aid was actually going to improve the lot of our brothers and sisters in the Southern Hemisphere and these other countries. Anybody who still thinks that is nuts. Mm-hmm. This machine is obviously not about aid. Nobody who's paying attention still thinks this international aid and development industry is about improving anybody's situation. It simply doesn't happen. Michael Matheson Miller does a really good job of teasing this out in Poverty Inc. Right. Terrific documentary, folks. It's on Amazon. I know, just if you have a minute, he really, I think, in a very charitable, fair, and sort of in a hidden, rigorous way, kind of really fleshes all this out in a really interesting way. Mm-hmm. The international aid and development industry is not about aiding anybody. It's not about developing anything. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar industry where if you're on the right side of it, you can do really well.
It was Becky and I had Michael Matheson Miller on the podcast to talk about Poverty Inc., to talk about the documentary. So watching it advance, I had no shadow of a clue. I mean, and he does. The way you described it was very good, in a very charitable way, but yet very direct and data driven. This isn't his idea that he cooked up in his head because he saw something and then extrapolated some wild narrative. He just very clearly backs it with data and then lays out the whole way that this, like you said, multi-billion-dollar international industry works and why it works the way it does and what the end result is, which is, like you said, not the improvement of life, conditions, prospects, and future development of these countries, but instead, in a real sense, the business of international aid is almost parasitic on the countries that it's allegedly supposed to be helping. And here too, Catholic Relief Services is in there. It's in that mix, maybe trying to navigate it with the best of intention. But yeah, that Poverty Inc. Again, like you said, watch it if this topic is of any interest. It will be eye-opening what he pulls the veil back on.
Right, and as we talk about Catholic social doctrine later, I mean that he's one of the better articulators of the principles for people who want to think about this in international terms, what international development and economics might look like. That's all interesting, and he nails it. I don't think that's necessarily the essence of Catholic social teaching, and I think people who treat it that way, like we treat it more as a grab bag for our preconceived ideas a lot of times. We'll get to that, I hope, if we have time. But as far as how this USAID driven, but many countries are involved in this on both ends of it, in the receiving and the sort of the victim end and the perpetrator end, I would put it. It's super complicated. There's so many acronyms you could never keep up, this whole alphabet soup of things. And I think that's part of what confuses people. Like, they have a general sense that it's good, and all these are highly trained individuals with good intentions. So I'm sure it's not perfect, but it's the best we can do, I don't think it's the best we can do. I think the church especially can do a lot better. And I think the church, from its heart, has always done better. I think Catholic social teaching says a lot about that. But as it pertains to the participation of Catholic Relief Services in this machine, the reason... let me put it this way. One time I went to Uganda, working for Human Life International. We were working on a documentary. We kept hearing these stories of tons of women just being given these long-term, long-acting reversible contraceptives or LARCs. They're being given these things without any explanation, no examination, no explanation. The Gates Foundation led Family Planning 2020. The goal was to give it to 200 million women in Africa and Asia in the Southern Hemisphere. CRS was not part of that. All of CRS's partners were. But CRS itself was not involved in that project. But USAID, all these aid, they were all doing this thing. And little by little, they stopped pretending like they cared about the other aspects of development. Pretty soon, it was more and more just about reproductive health care. And hearing as we did through our missionary partners and the folks that we had there too, like they're doing this to millions of women. They're giving them what we call Norplant, this injection in the arm, which actually is banned in a lot of places now because it's horrible for women's health. They're giving out like candy over there. They call it Implanon over there. Depo-Provera has a lot of like black box restrictions here, but they're giving it out like candy in Africa with no warnings. No,
and that's an injection, right? Yeah.
And the Gates Foundation, last I heard, they probably pulled the trigger on this by now, but they're trying to do self-administered versions because you can't just keep giving it to women all the time. You have to pay people to do that. We're not going to keep paying. Just as long as they do it and stop having kids, it's not our problem. But I'm sorry, they're trying to help women in their dignity. Achieve freedom from their husbands and other things, as the Gates Foundation sees it, this very strong feminist. If you look at all their literature and everything, it's always a woman of strong subjectivity, very dignified. And if the husband's there at all, he's only there to verify her desire to not have kids. Like that's the husband's entire role as the Gates Foundation sees it. So you work in this milieu, that's what's going on. Family Planning 2020, all these other big projects going on, they're all about population control still. This is still going on right now. It's not just like 50s, 60s. Like they call it reproductive health now. They call it aid in development, but it's the same thing.
What is the? And sorry, I just jumped right on top of your point there, but like you said, the overpopulation thing. It's not that it's disappeared, but it's largely been discredited. Even just down to the basic, the math was way off. The human population isn't going to expand exponentially, but arithmetically, you're not going to outrun natural resources in 30 years kind of thing. And it's all, we've already run way past all of the deadlines for catastrophe that Paul Ehrlich laid out. So what's the narrative for USAID, for the Gates Foundation? You named a bunch of other ones from around Europe and stuff too. This alphabet soup of NGOs and international aid folks, whose why is population control. They know that this stuff has largely been discredited. But if your business model is still about bending that curve down, the population curve down, what else are you going to do? So this actually boils down to business model and profit. Of course, yeah. Wow. A massive industry. And by the way, the population curve, it hasn't started going down yet. I mean, Europe is going downhill. Right. Asia, several countries in Asia, China, Japan's been at disastrous levels. Like, they're not going to recover. These countries are going to be less and less of what they ever were. They can't even bring enough people into these countries anymore. So most of Asia is already going down. Most of Europe is going down very fast. Italy, Spain, these countries, they're just not having kids. America is trying to catch up with them, but we keep bringing immigrants in. So our population doesn't look quite like these other curves. And wherever the United States-led machine does this, it does that. It was always intended to bend these curves down. But where it's at now, it's probably going to peak around 10 billion. Now there's some debates about whether or not it's going to reach that or if it's just going to go over it. But there's too many factors. It's just going to go down. And now people like Elon Musk, not one to make a religious argument or a conservative one for that matter, is trying to raise the alarm in his personal life, having progeny in ways that doesn't necessarily earn the church's blessing, but life is good. But he's one of the people trying to raise the alarm and say, no, the problem is now underpopulation. Right. Stop this. Stop trying to control these other countries. Stop it. The church has been saying that all along. Or the living part of the church has been saying that all along, I should say. The part of the church that fits into this machine still profits from the machine. I'm sorry.
if people who are still involved in this machine at this point, after all these years, I started to say too, when you think that this international aid industry is about raising a country up, I would just ask anybody to fly to Uganda. You fly into Entebbe Airport, which has been featured in some films here in the West. You fly into the airport, and you get out, you step down to the tarmac. It doesn't look like Denver or Sky Harbor, but there will probably be a huge UN supply plane there. And you see all these really nice Toyota 4Runners, Land Rovers, Land Cruisers with these breathing devices, and they all have these logos on the side. UN, Murray Stopes, CARE International. And you start looking around like, this is really interesting. I guess it looks a little bit like the movie. And so, you take your backpack and you get your bags and you walk down through the terminal and you get a ride. We got a ride with Father Jonathan in his own beat up 4Runner, because that's how you have to get to the outback there. And we're driving down from the airport towards Kampala. So from Entebbe to Kampala, there's a 2-lane road. And when you leave the airport, you would not believe the houses. You think of Uganda, and we don't have an image here of a very lively economy or culture or anything like that, for good reason a lot of times. But you would be astounded by the houses close to the airport, say within a mile and a half radius of the airport. The presidential palace is there. It actually looks like Sedona. There's a lot of red rock, and you're driving down from the airport towards Kampala.
So you're talking like around the airport mansions, like
right, like
estates,
you would think you're in Los
beautiful.
Angeles. You think you're in Hollywood, big mansions.
Yeah.
And I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. Very orderly thing. But the further you drive down that road towards Kampala, the more you start seeing shanties along the road and the things that you might see from fundraising pieces about help to people in Uganda. And even before you get to Kampala, you're seeing this change. Like, I wonder how much of this aid money stops at the airport. How much of this aid money doesn't just stop in America at these big NGOs, and it certainly does. But how much of it that actually makes it to the country gets past a mile of the airport?
So whose houses are those?
Well, the country's president, or whatever you call a person, the people who work for him, which is often family and cronies. So you have to pay everybody to get access away from the airport. You want protection, don't you? You want access, right? You want to be able to build that clinic, right? So that's where a lot of money stops, is right around the airport. But it's also the NGO country directors. Marie Stopes probably has a couple mansions that the country director just comes in and stays in. And Marie Stopes, by the way, is the largest committer of abortion in the world. That's just what they do. That's what
where are they from?
From the UK.
UK. Okay. Yeah. I think I've heard of them before.
Yeah, it's this company that these two guys who started the Adam and Eve business, that porn business, whatever it is. They also started Marie Stopes International, based on the Planned Parenthood's Margaret Sanger's contemporary in the UK at the time. She was doing abortion there. Margaret Sanger was doing contraception here, but they wrote to each other. They're very much similar souls. So they named it after her. But they also started this thing called DKT International, and another thing called Population Services International. They didn't hide it back then. This is before population control was out of favor. So Marie Stopes would do the abortions, open the clinics, bring abortionists in, teach people how to do abortion. DKT would do marketing, and PSI would do marketing for abortion, for contraception. So they start these companies. Again, it's an alphabet soup of stuff, but that's just like one of these sort of many tentacled monsters that works in this machine. And CRS works with PSI, Population Services International, all the time. They work with them every year. They pass lots of money to this group. CRS doesn't do abortions. They don't directly fund abortions that I've ever seen. But they do know that the projects that they collaborate on with PSI are meant to introduce things to the world. So they'll help with the good part. They'll help with the well, with the mosquito nets, whatever the legitimate development need. Again, after 30 years, is it still legitimate? Why don't they have mosquito net factories all over the place? Why are we still giving them them? Yeah. That's another question, but that's one of the ways that CRS, by working in this machine, can claim, not all the time, but often, that they're doing the right thing. but they're working with people, and they're funded by USAID specifically to work with these people. They're told by USAID who to work with. You're going to work with Care International, with PSI on this project. They can't say no, or they have to reject the project. And they accept the terms, they accept the outcomes, they accept the partners, they get paid. That's how the thing works. So a lot of times they're doing legitimate work.
So you're saying that it may be that at the beginning, when Catholic Relief Services out of the United States started partnering with USAID, started partnering with some of these other groups in these projects, and doing the good stuff up front, they may not have been aware or not fully aware of what these other organizations were doing in behind them. But at this point, you're saying there's no way they don't know what happens next in the story. So CRS comes in, they dig a well, they build a school, they help fund a new wing on the hospital or something, and then they leave. But they're partnered in this project, which is why they're running it. They've got the funding. They're the pass-through with all these other and you say they know darn well what happens next. When they leave, in comes Marie Stopes, in comes USAID, and they're going to do contraception and abortion and sterilizations and the whole population. So
right. So CRS won't do any of that stuff. CRS will be a pass-through agent for some of these projects. Not for Marie Stopes, not for IPPF or International Planned Parenthood Foundation, but for PSI, sure. For Care International, sure. And they definitely promote abortion. For a lot of these groups, again, that were founded with the best of intentions, they saw where the money was. And so they all adjusted things. CRS has been able to sort of stay in this middleman position for a lot of things, or the things that they directly oversee often have at least partly good outcomes. Things that everybody would say, okay, great. They're at least they're getting disaster relief there. They're getting food and clothing to this area. So I don't want to condemn anybody. I don't want to misrepresent them. But the fact is too that as you drive further from Entebbe, further from the airport down into the outback of Uganda, very little of the money gets away from that thing. So you're not helping these places. The ones who actually do execute are the ones who are often with the networks. The Catholic Church has the biggest network around the world. We have this, again, Catholic social teaching. We built churches. We send missionaries to convert people so that they know and love Jesus Christ, so they have, their eternal destination in mind. But also always we develop the community while we're there. Like it's always at the same time. You build a church, you can have a tabernacle, an altar. You learn how to worship, you learn how this fits together. But you're also always helping people plant crops, build houses. Like it's the same thing as the church is concerned, unless you're in this machine. Then the machine as it operates, this international development machine, there is nothing evangelistic. It's a necessary condition that you reject the possibility of evangelization to participate in it. So as far as all these big things operate, there are still people shouldn't get too they shouldn't despair over all this stuff. I mean, there's fantastic groups doing great stuff. Aid to the Church in Need has a much bigger. I've only learned about them more recently. I've heard about them. I know they're great, but they have a pretty big budget, a pretty big donor base, and they get a lot of good stuff done from a large donor base, from what I can understand. And they get all their money from Catholics. That's all. They work with the church in the same networks. They work through the church. So it's a Catholic aid and development agency, but it's there for the whole person and every person, what the church calls integral human development. CRS also has a big donor base through the Rice Bowl, through the church collection. And that part of CRS's fundraising funds 2% of their budget, or the low single digits. We don't have the math on the last couple of years, but it's a very small part of their budget that comes from Catholics. Very small part.
So most of their budget, most of Catholic Relief Services budget then comes from where?
USAID. Last year it was $900 million plus. $900 million. They're a $1.5 billion operation right now. Most of the remainder comes there's several federal agencies. There's USAID, there's PEPFAR, there's these other international things called the Global Fund for AIDS Research. The Gates Foundation is another enormous driver of this machine. And again, every one of them, you can point to things and say like, okay, that's good. We'd support that. A polio vaccine, terrific, like that kind of thing. But Gates is another one where he doesn't hide his intentions. He thinks there's way too many people in the world.
Yeah.
And he wants to develop these projects. And you'd think the last person you want to collaborate with in the field is somebody who admits that they're there to lower population, to sort of wrap this bitter pill in sugar, the sugar being legitimate development of things. But that's where CRS operates.
There's you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with Mary Eberstadt. She in one of her books, and I'll forget which one. She talks specifically about this whole population control movement, and even more specifically about the Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates. I think there was where I first learned that Bill Gates's dad was like a uppity up guy, top level guy in Planned Parenthood for a chunk of his career too. So it's like it kind of runs in the family a little bit. But she made the observation. She's like, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on the Gates Foundation's population control website to see which populations we're talking about controlling. She's like, not a lot of Swedish faces on that page. And then I might get this quote a little bit wrong. I think I basically got it. And it just I memorized it specifically because it just so struck me the way she said it. So having made that observation, look at the Gates Foundation population control page. You can see which populations they want reduced. And then she says this spectacle of pale people from increasingly sterile countries telling certain other people not to have their own children is going to appear grotesque in the rearview mirror of history, which I just thought that's pretty well said there. That kind of sums it up.
It is. And that's what makes me wonder if we're not on the cusp of something huge here. This chaos in the federal government right now with the Trump takeover and Doge being given the keys to all these cars.
Yeah.
One of them being USAID. And they've started to trickle out a lot of the projects that are just yuck. Like, well, what are we doing there? Why are we sponsoring these LGBT musicals in South America? Like, what is this thing? What's the U.S. interest? Exactly. What's the U.S. interest here? And then you realize, like, at a certain point, the overall vision of the government and what it thinks it owes to the world. Before we used to think you should do these things, so we'll give you the say to do it. It became population control. Stop having kids. Here's a mosquito net. And now it's, show this stuff to your kids. Put them in this musical. Here's your mosquito net. So it's just a more further developed version of the same radical secular mindset.
Well, if that's not the definition of cultural imperialism, I mean, holy cow, that's
that perfectly fits. That's exactly what's been going on. And again, I feel like I need to stick up a little bit for CRS here. CRS, as far as we've seen, is not advancing those things specifically. Though if I could, it's impossible to work in this machine and not get one's hands dirty. I think there was. I started to tell you about this earlier, but in 2017, again, our missionaries, what I saw in Tanzania, Uganda, and South America, Central America, we've done these documentaries here. The themes are all consistent. What is going on? These same NGOs, the same alphabet soup people are doing the same thing. And when we try to tell people as pro-life missionaries, what the nature of the family is, the nature of the human person, how this plays out with being open to life and rejecting abortion, all these things, it's a very positive message. But you also have to be aware of the threats. And when we describe the threats, it was often this alphabet soup. Like, this is this group, IPPF, International Planned Parenthood, PSI, Care International. They're going to come at you with these things. This is how they work in your schools. These, like, here are the traps, just so you're aware of them. So that was a big part of what the mission was. And then we see them partnering with CRS, and we're like, guys, we reached out to them personally. We didn't, it got public at a while, but we didn't set out that way. What's going on? Do you know what these people do? And the CRS basically, oh yeah, we know, but we don't do that stuff. And we don't support it. We don't tell them we do. But you are doing like the nice part of the bad projects with them, right? no, you don't understand. It's really complicated. It's this whole like shoulder back patting thing. Just stop thinking about that. We have this nice letter from a bishop we've worked with. No, but guys, that they need sugar for this bitter pill. The sugar part is development. You guys are doing the development part. Why? What's up with these partnerships? And eventually it went public, unfortunately, at the time. So I ended up having a meeting with their leadership, with the chairman of CRS, with the person who oversees their international development work, and a theologian that they'd sort of brought on to rubber stamp. I don't know how much he actually found critical of the work, but that day he was pretty supportive. So we're sitting there, both sides of the table. We're trying to do this directly with our brother. Before we, they invited us over. We had a nice conversation. We had mass with them, and so we sat down. And I'd sent them in advance a deck where it was a program called Access. Again, everything's an acronym. AXXESS. 2014, the years about that. There was a program that was from the beginning about opening clinics and filling them with contraception. It's been going on forever. It's an old thing. But this one CRS ran. They owned it. They bid for the project. They won the project. They delivered the project. They published the papers showing the partners. Everybody knew how many units of Depo-Provera, of Implanon, of condoms, of everything else. How much of it was given. They have to report all this stuff.
Yeah.
And they even used to have to publish it, but they don't publish it much anymore for reasons that
so
shouldn't be.
There's records on all this.
We had all the receipts, and I sent it to them. Guys, this is what we're going to talk about. And the person from CRS, with the chairman right next to me, said, "We didn't do that."
In spite of the documentation.
Yeah, I go. So what did you do? Well, you got to understand, it's really complicated, but you were the directing, you were the executing partner here. Like, you actually were in charge. I forgot the actual term. There's a specific term. They were that partner that was in charge of the entire development program. They were responsible for its execution. It doesn't mean they did everything, but they were the pass-through. And in this case, not just a pass-through, but actual director. They had to deliver everything. They opened this many clinics. They delivered this many units. And
they bid on the project, meaning
they knew exactly.
Someone said, "This is what we want to do. We'll take bids." CRS bid on, "We can do that for you," and they got the bid.
Yeah, and it wasn't a matter where they could carve out the good part in this one. It was just birth control, and it was all the methods. The one place where they mention the rhythm method, they say specifically as a way to introduce the other more effective methods afterwards. Even that one was, so that was the entire program. And that's actually really common now. Like, it's less and less about the good stuff. Like, they don't even feel the need to hide it a lot of times anymore. So anyway, so CRS did this one. We had the receipts. We sat down with them. And I was dumbstruck. They didn't actually offer, they didn't bring anything showing they didn't do it. They didn't produce documents saying, actually, you misunderstood there. They just said they didn't do it, even though they reported to the government that they did. And I remember I looked at the chairman, and my president was with me too, and he was kind of grabbing my arm. I'm Irish. You can tell when when I'm getting there. He was kind of grabbing my arm. I go, "Then what did you do?" And then I showed him a video too, where a person in a CRS shirt is sitting there explaining how successful the program was, how we opened this many clinics and everybody's healthier. And on the bottom is the Chiron. So 120,000 units of whatever it was, this large quantities of injectable, of IUDs, of pills, of Depo-Provera that had to be delivered, part of this program that CRS said they did, reported they did, got paid to do. And then they said they didn't do it. And I remember thinking at the time, it was just a really strange thing, the audacity of it. Like, there wasn't even a counter explanation. It was just, no, we didn't.
Yeah.
And I was just hoping, I remember hoping the bishops would just check it out. Like, you don't have to believe me. Like, these things are complicated. Would you please check it out? And as far as we can tell, they didn't. So we're in this place where Lepanto Institute, Michael Hitchborn, continues to report on it. and he's treated like he's crazy.
Right.
If anybody who ever saw the abuse scandal unfold, the dynamics are very similar. There's people kind of know what's going on, but nobody's going to do anything about it.
Right.
The people who actually try to do something about it are marginalized. They're accused of, my friend Michael Haysborn is a friend of mine, and his research it's gonna hold up when they do look into it.
But they get gaslighted too.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Wow.
they say
Wow.
they can say honestly that they do good stuff. They can say honestly that, well, I can't even read their minds in the positive sense. I want to grant them the best in charity, but when we have all the receipts and we said, guys, what are you doing in this? And what they said was just a lie. I'll just say it. There was no way that what they told the government was all false, and what they're telling the chairman today was true. There's no way. I remember thinking after that, like there's a term I forget where it came from, diabolical disorientation. Like everybody kind of knows what's going on, but when it comes down to actually just checking it out, you can do it discreetly. You don't do it for the masses. Don't do it for the conservative websites.
Yeah.
Don't do it, like, forget all that stuff. Just, you've got some trailheads here. You have people, actually we both know somebody, a priest who understands stuff, who worked at Coronum.
Right.
Somebody who like could interpret things and are very charitable but fair, but would know what's going on. We know people who know accounting, who can track this stuff down. Just check it out, please. And then they put out statements, and of course I'm crazy too in the statements, and we have a board who pays close attention to these things. They would say in these statements, and I remember thinking, I've been on boards. We don't dig into the details.
Yeah, right.
Especially in a $1.5 billion organization, they're not digging into the details.
Yeah.
You look at the 990s online, all the grantees and the grantors are gone. They've taken them all out, which they can do legally, but you have to ask for them. And when you do, you'll find PSI, CARE International, the same groups. So again, kind of a lot of time to spend on this. So that was something that, as we were trying to tell people what the church says about the human person, about sexuality, about community, about the basics of social doctrine, even how the goodness of the church's moral and social doctrine, like it's one thing.
Yeah.
Social doctrine grows out of the moral doctrine.
Right.
You can't skip that part.
Right.
So we're trying to tell people this, and stand strong. Here are the traps. You guys, you have what you need. Let us know. Here's some research if you need it. And then they could point to these groups and the CRS logo right next to them. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you guys. I saw a hospital in Dar es Salaam, a Catholic hospital, where we weren't there to ask about CRS or anything. We were there to talk about how women are getting these IUDs and things put in them. And so we meet with this doctor. We have our cameras set up, and I'm saying, so do you ever feel pressure from these big aid agencies? They had a USAID plaque right inside the Catholic hospital. I'm like, oh, great. All right, here we go. All right, so I asked him the question, and the interpreter interpreted for him, and he looked at me, and he looked at the interpreter, and the interpreter repeated the question, and the doctor just looks at me and just took off his microphone and left.
Wow.
And he, like, somebody else walked in, another doctor. I think he was new. Another doctor walked in, and nobody would answer a question. Like, we were supposed to do this interview, we had it scheduled, but they wouldn't answer a question that I didn't have any intention. This wasn't like a gotcha kind of thing. I thought, like, you guys got to be feeling pressure for those things, but they had obviously accepted the pressure.
Right.
So,
Right.
So what do we do with
Steve,
it?
talk a little bit about that documentary. You've alluded to the fact that you're traveling internationally with Human Life International to do a documentary. Part of it, at least, was following up with some of the women who had been left behind in this whole drive to contracept. And what was the documentary? What was the impetus behind doing it? And then kind of what came of it, because that's a pretty fascinating thing to be doing a documentary on.
Well, yeah, we'd started something called the True Story Project, and we had a change in leadership, so we had some opportunities. I was able to do some things. I thought it's really hard to report on what's going on across the Atlantic or across the Pacific in ways that Americans can actually kind of feel and get used to. So I was like, so what if we did a deeper dive, like documentary? So we started in the Philippines, the tons of pressure they were getting in the Philippines, very Catholic country. They were getting tons of pressure. They were trying to push through these RH, or reproductive health laws. The second one we did was in Central and Eastern Europe, so Hungary, Poland, which has become a very interesting part of the world. But at the time, Poland was the first country ever to reverse abortion laws, and Hungary was just starting to push back really hard against this stuff. So we captured the story there. The third one was Central and South America. That was the first one I actually traveled for. So I went down there with our shooting crew, and it's the same story. It's the same thing. Like, if you want to work in these sectors, you have to play ball. Sometimes it gets into banking, into commerce, into other things too. Like, just sign off on this. Okay, you're gonna share the stuff with your employees. You're gonna introduce it at your places. So it's in the air you breathe in a lot of these places. We saw it in Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico City. So the fourth one I was going to do was going to be the first one for a wider audience. That was going to be the one from Africa. So we actually had two crews, or two shooters. One who was going to kind of help me document what HLI is doing and everything. And I was trying to introduce it to somebody who had just had a very successful international sort of women's rights campaign in Asia, with forced abortion and sterilization in India, and just what that does to a culture. And so we introduced the ideas, and the last day of the last interview, the very last stop on the way back to Kampala in Uganda, we lost everything. Did I tell you about that? We're sitting there interviewing people, and the shooter who was with me had his gear with him, so we were doing some interviews there. The secular shooter, who again, aligned, fantastic guy, but he wasn't Catholic. He's just a guy who recognizes that scale of abuse because he's seen it up close and he's already told that story. So he recognized what was going on in these countries. Lost all his gear. I lost my bag. We lost almost everything we had, which is an interesting way to end a trip. So that particular project kind of got cut off in a couple ways. We lost funding. So I was able to give footage to some other people so it could advance, but it hurt a lot when I had to walk away from that one. I just couldn't keep it funded and on. And again, I was a one-man communications department at the time, so that was a big passion, intellectual project for me. I loved working on those things, but unfortunately, we couldn't get that one produced. And I felt terrible because, for example, we went to this one park it was in Uganda. I forget, it was this one park. We were supposed to talk to 10 women, one of whom had been locked in a room by Marie Stopes. And the coercion is definitely still happening there, by the way. Marie Stopes, the RH team, locked 11 women in a room and forced them to take IUDs. Like, they were allowed to choose one, and all they had was IUDs, so they chose IUDs. Their lives fell apart. It's not real professional healthcare. So when one of these women came out, we caught her story. And as we met her, though, 260 women showed up.
Oh my gosh.
And we
having heard that you were there, and that you were having this conversation.
A couple of them had heard that we were like a medical team to help them remove the implant, to remove the IUD, to remove these things. Because once the Gates Foundation puts these things in them, they're gone. They just disappear. They're there to get 200 million units out, and then they're gone. They're not going to put pharmacies there. They're not building hospitals. They're not training doctors to help women who have all the sort of downstream effects of these things. Not just the physical effects, but the social effects when they become, in their village, a pariah because they can't have kids. Because, they have an IUD and they're bleeding. And there's no doctor to help them out. Their husband beats them, throws them out of the house, takes up with another woman. And a lot of these villages have these little cliques of women. We saw one of the villages we stopped by. I think there was 15 women. We met most of them, and they're saying, "I don't talk to my husband anymore. He won't talk to me. I have no energy to work." Which, again, if you read the fine print, if you try to buy Depo-Provera in America and open up the thing, you'll see
right, yeah,
as longer than your body.
Yeah.
About the warnings of this thing.
Yeah.
They get none of the warnings. They just get the thing. I was livid. And we were there for like 10 days, and by the end I was just so exhausted. So anyways, we came back, and that kind of thing is still definitely happening over the world. Wherever you see reproductive health, aid and development, that is always part of the mix.
It's just, it's eye-opening, and it's scandalous, it's shocking.
And again, I feel compelled to say this one more time. I'm not saying that CRS is. Actually, they did that one program, so they're morally responsible for that particular access program. Again, if anybody ever wanted to check this out, look up Access 2014. If they have access to those records, but and I'm sure that's not the only one, but a lot of what CRS does is good. It's the kind of thing that people think they're supporting if they ever give that that little paper bucket of change, the rice bowl, or the annual collection.
Yeah, they're given the 2%, but the rest of it's coming from
all that
other actors.
All that becomes 2% of a budget. The 2% that is actually meant to look Catholic to the United States. That's the part that it funds.
Yeah, the Catholic tail is not
right. The part that's happening in the Southern Hemisphere, the part that's funded by USAID, that cannot be evangelistic. That cannot be in any way Catholic. Distinguishing, they can't hire Catholics. They cannot promote the Bible. They can't. They can't tell the full picture of human sexuality. What they can do is hand them a sheet with condom information.
Because that's a government program,
right? Yeah. But it'll still have a CRS logo on it. We found that a bunch of times.
Gosh, there's so much there.
I get pretty worked up. So.
It's contagious because just listening to it is it's scandalous. It is scandalous. So here's the thing that occurs to me that just Steve, as you're describing where this relationship stands now, and this is true. This is true in a number of areas in the church vis-a-vis its relationship with the culture on a lot of different fronts right now, for a variety of reasons. And you'd have to chase this down each trailhead depending on what aspect of the church and the culture you're looking at. But in far too many instances, over time, for whatever specific reasons would be part of that particular history, the church has become indistinguishable or virtually indistinguishable from the culture in the way it thinks, in the way it speaks, the way it acts, and the way it prioritizes and allocates resources, etc. And the tragic thing about that is, speaking specifically to the example of the whole, international aid and working theoretically in service of the poor, the needy, the marginalized, the downtrodden, those who genuinely need help, is that as a church, we're supposed to be operating from a set of fundamental principles and truths, which should make us immune to the kind of nonsense that flows into this work from folks who, and in defense of the folks who push the nonsense into the work. And I'm not trying to defend someone like, the Gates Foundation, who is intentionally trying to foist population control on underprivileged populations and then leaves them to their fate afterward. That's indefensible. But in terms of the mindset, I'm not asking those people to think like the Catholic Church, but I am asking the Catholic Church to think like the Catholic Church. And there's just a higher standard. We have been entrusted with a more than human wisdom on all of this stuff. We see the human person with a depth and clarity that is simply unavailable to those outside the Christian worldview, and in some ways even outside the Catholic Christian worldview. And so then for the church to basically compromise that fundamental truth, that deeper wisdom, in order to make common cause, again, whatever the reasons you would rationalize it or justify it, to me seems at the very best just terribly short-sighted. Like how do you not see what that compromise costs in the long term? Today it might enable you to partner up with somebody and maybe do some genuine good somewhere. But that's not for free. As I've said for years and years and years, there are no consequence-free compromises of the truth. And when the church is at her best, she simply stands on the truth, because as we know, the truth is not some abstract concept for Catholics. It's a person. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So to compromise the truth is in some sense, intentional or not, to take your hand out of the hand of Christ and say, in this little sphere, we're just going to kind of freelance it, Jesus. Hang out, we'll get back to you. We still think you're great, but here we need to do this our way. And we're gonna partner with these folks. And like I said, the kindest thing I can think of to say is it's just extremely short-sighted, no matter how well intended. But then as it begins to unfold the way it necessarily is going to, you've compromised the truth. That bill is going to come due. You're going to begin to see the cost of having made that little compromise. You're giving away, to use an Old Testament analogy, like we sell our birthright for a mess of pottage. We're the Catholic Church, and the thing that
for whales.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. What profit of the man if he sells his soul to gain the whole world? But for whales, St. Thomas More speaking to Richard Rich. As the church kind of pursues this strange and foolish course of giving away our birthright for a mess of pottage, sacrificing what we've been entrusted with inch by acre, the message of the church becomes less and less distinct. Our countercultural presence becomes harder and harder to see. And the fact that we're meant to be a city on a hill, we're meant to be a beacon, we're meant to be the lighthouse in the storm. Here are the rocks, here's the harbor, here's home. It's endlessly frustrating to me that we seem to continue to wed ourselves to these policies. Okay, so I ramble on and on.
No, that was very well said.
So well said. I say all that to say, let's pivot for a second to what are the bedrock principles from which the church ought to carry on the great and necessary work of Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is Christ saying, hey, when I come back in power as judge, I'll separate the sheep from the goats, the righteous from the damned. And here's the cheat sheet. Here's the criteria. In case you're interested, I was naked and you clothed me, hungry and you fed me, thirsty you gave me drink, sick in prison you visited me, stranger you gave me welcome, and whenever you did this, the least of my brother. And then out goes the church, the early Christians from the beginning, just living that gospel, always, everywhere, and still today. Find human need anywhere on the face of the planet, you'll find the church. There's going to be some religious order there with their sleeves rolled up, bathing lepers and feeding starving, etc. But what are the foundational principles? Because I think for a lot of Catholics, we hear social justice, and even internal to the church, what we think of is not the bedrock principles of the church's understanding of that mission that she's been doing for 2,000 years, but instead some kind of pseudo-secularized version that makes a lot of devout, faithful Catholics nervous. They hear it even in the church and like, yeah, I don't know. That's that goofy wing of the church that is in bed with all these ideologues and wokeism and whatever. Take us back to kind of the foundation.
Well, let's both do it. I mean, you're much more scholarly on these topics. I mean, I've got some very interesting experiences, and I've got my thoughts, and I've got a very worn out copy of the Compendium of Catholic Social Doctrine. So the principles. Well, start with Acts, right? Acts of the Apostles. These were people transformed by Christ, and they fought it. You read the Gospels. These guys, they weren't the sharpest tools in the shed. God does that. He wants us to know who's really making things happen, out of love, because all of us, but for the grace of God, would be there too.
Yeah,
so,
amen.
Acts 2, the entire Acts of the Apostles, you see it happen organically. I'm not saying that's the natural situation we find ourselves in today or always will. Right. So the principles there are important, though. What you see there is the rebirth. It's not just the birth of the church; it's the rebirth of humanity in a sense, right? With baptism, it began there. So God goes. There's theological concepts there. I'm just not qualified to talk about, but I know that with the beginning of the church, with baptism, with the Eucharist, especially, and the other sacraments that are in their most elemental form in that sense. Those are really animating. The Holy Spirit is animating that, using the sacraments as that happens. And of course, what that looks like is people sharing everything they have, not being told to do so. Again, some people didn't get that right, obviously, but and they had very harsh consequences. I forget that passage,
Right.
but which passage that is. But you see people who like saying, we're doing this for love of God. I love you in a different way because of God, because of Jesus Christ, because my heart's been transformed. I love you in a more full way. And that's basically the roots of the church's anthropology.
Yeah.
It's the Trinitarian anthropology. God, the Holy Trinity, is a communion. The eternal love of Father and Son takes the form of the love of God and the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is the soul of the church. That's how God builds. God can obviously intervene. God can do whatever he wants. But he also saw in the fullness of time that he would put his Son here in a family. Mm-hmm. He would actually be born in the way humans are born before him. Every part of that story means something. They began in a family. That family was holy. That family was not wealthy. That family didn't have any concern necessarily with the proper economic form that the early church or the Romans should take. Right. Taxes. They didn't care. That wasn't what social doctrine was. It was born of a family because Jesus Christ was there. And that's what changed the world. It wasn't a theory. It was a person.
Yep.
So that takes shape in the church. And now, over time, the church starts getting better at like building and articulating and growing these communities that somehow always form around a church, around the altar, around a tabernacle. Again, these evolved over time, right? Brant Petrie and the roots of the Eucharist.
Right.
For example, Father Walsh had a terrific talk he did at St. Anne's actually recently. Hits a lot of these same points. It is beautiful how this stuff develops organically and spiritually because they're the same thing, because we're incarnate beings. Like that's who we are. So that's Catholic anthropology. We are meant to be made, or we are made in God's image, and we're meant to build, to create, to share in his redemptive work. Acts of the Apostles becomes early Christendom, becomes these towns and cities that spread out through Europe, through Northern Africa, and start going out to different parts of the world because the people going out to the ends of the world believed that those people they talked to were also meant for eternity. Mm-hmm. They weren't just going to go out there and say, hey, here's a mosquito net. That's all I got. Good luck. Sorry, that was maybe a bit of a pot shot there. But they were never just about the material. Right. It was also, it was always soul and body, the whole thing, because that's how we're made as human beings. That's how our communities form. And they would always put the church at the center because the heart of the church is Christ and the soul of the church is the Holy Spirit. And that's how you would do a church. In Europe, it's really beautiful how it took shape in Europe. You have the church, the piazza, the shops, the homes, the wall. If there's enemies, there was a wall. Sorry, walls are not bad all the time. And you even couldn't keep a roof over your head if you didn't have walls, by the way. So like all these things take shape naturally and organically. I think that's when you're talking about Catholic social teaching, just meditate on that.
Yeah.
Because if you enter into the conversation about Catholic social doctrine about what form of economics is best between countries in, for example, the European Union, yes, the church has something to say about that.
Yeah.
But it's built on this structure, this organic spiritual structure based in the truth of the human person and community and the civitas and everything else that we do to build what God wants us to build. And not perfectly, there's sinners all along the way. Even the churches at times were built with labor that was unfairly gained. That's true. Mm-hmm. God still works with all these bent and broken lines. He still draws this beautiful painting that nobody else could have drawn. But by the time we get to Europe and like what actually looks like Catholic social doctrine reified, like embodied, incarnated, that's kind of what the church best has to offer the world. Yeah, at the center, really quickly to wrap it up, isn't just the tabernacle and the Eucharist. It's a place that is built so that we logically understand what's going on here. The liturgy matters.
Yes.
The liturgical element in Catholic social doctrine is something that whenever we talk about Catholic social doctrine and teaching, liturgy is nowhere to be found. But how else do you form a person to know Christ?
Yep.
Like before you learn like the tenets of Catholic social moral doctrine, you're in the pew. Mm-hmm. You're going up to receive Christ. Do you know why you're there? Do you know why you genuflect when you walk in? Like these basic things that are written into the very life of the church. If you skip all that and just come in at the economic interstate, what does an international body, what powers should it have? Like the UN portion, like the back of the compendium.
Yeah.
Like the church doesn't have a whole lot to say of value to that. It's interesting that we thought of it all beforehand. That's all intellectually interesting. But in this time, interesting says nothing to a world that's looking for real answers. So the principles come from there. And then, the dignity of the human person, solidarity, subsidiarity, the common good, which again, the compendium is built on those major 4 principles. In the United States, they have 7. The bishops in the 1970s decided it was 7. Anyway, so I could go on for a long time. I have lots of opinions, but I started talking over you.
Yeah, no. That's beautiful. That's exactly what I wanted to kind of pivot towards, because in reality, when the church is doing what she's called to do, when she's being what she's called to be, it's always from those principles, and it's always, as you said so well, it's always Christocentric. The minute there's anything else at the heart of the church's mission, it becomes disoriented and it becomes disordered, and it begins to fall apart. And it just blends into the background,
of course, like we're
yeah.
anybody else,
yeah,
like
yeah.
another NGO, if we're working in. Sorry, go ahead.
Which is true, as we know, in the life of we, the individual members of the church, of the mystical body. If I have something other than Christ at the center, I also become disoriented, disordered. I also become indistinguishable from anyone else in the culture. My marriage becomes indistinguishable from any other marriage in the culture, my family. I also appreciate that the church has always placed such strong and consistent emphasis on Catholic marriage and family life, as John Paul II calls it, the vital cell of human society. By which he means, of course, if we get that wrong, we can abandon any hope that we'll ultimately get the other stuff right. If we've lost our grip on what it means to be a human person, created male or female in the image and likeness of Almighty God, if we've lost our grip on the fact that God chose not because he had to, but because it means something, it has a theological content and depth to it, that he chose to create us in the context of human relationship, of marriage and family life, that he created marriage from the beginning to be a communion of persons in love, through which he would bring new persons into existence in the context of a communion of persons that's meant to serve for their good, their flourishing, their education, their formation, their training in the virtues, et cetera, et cetera. The church knows all this. And when she has that foremost in her mind, then she's a luminous witness to the world. Then she shows a disordered world. The world's always disordered. It's not just in our time, it's in every time, from the fall. This is meant to be the luminous presence of Christ in his church and in his church's members.
Amen.
Showing people the way home. This is, Pope Francis echoing a truth that has been communicated through the whole history of the church, but putting a nice kind of apt metaphor on it for our time, saying that the church is a field hospital after battle. Yeah, a field hospital in the thick of the battle too, in the white heat of battle, in a culture where people are going to fall wounded and broken constantly. To live the insanity that the culture is descending into. I refer to it as a new anthropological dark ages. Like we have lost our grip on reality and the truth. We're descending into this anthropological dark ages. We don't know which way is up anymore. We struggle answering questions like, what is a woman? When a culture just falls silent in the face of a question that basic, we've gone off the rails. We are over the wall and off. And so in the middle of that kind of context, people are going to be damaged. There are no consequence-free compromises of the truth, and we have thrown truth out the window wholesale for decades, for generations now. And so I think Pope Francis sees something very clearly when he says, we're a field hospital. We are surrounded by broken and wounded people, and the church is meant to be where they're healed and where they're brought home. But only if the church is willing to be who she is and to do what she was created to do. And so those principles, the solidarity, we belong to each other, subsidiarity, that problems should be solved and challenges met at the most local level possible, starting with marriage and family. You know, the autonomy of a husband and wife, a mother and father in their own home and over their own children, as opposed to the, oh, your children actually belong to the state. They're not so much your children, let alone God's children. You know, for heaven forfend, we have to even consider that possibility. They're the state's children. They're her citizens, her future citizens. And so thank you very much for generating them. We'll gladly take them at your front door, and then we'll feed them into the wood chipper that is our education system. And then we'll have predictable outcomes at the end, and little cogs in the machine of the state and the economy that will do what they've been taught to do and think what they've been told to think. So the church is the corrective to all of that. Is meant to be the corrective to all of that. And the church is meant to be that. Again, I just used the metaphor of a lighthouse. You know, we live in a culture of all kinds of storms and tides and waves and danger, and yet there's supposed to be this clear light that shows us the rocks to avoid and shows us where the safe harbor is so that we can find our way home. When it comes to just that dynamic that you talked about, you know, the building of Christendom, always with the church at the center, which means Christ at the center, which means the Eucharist and the liturgy at the center. Where have you seen that done effectively? And maybe internationally too. You know, you've been to the quote unquote global South, a place where the church is often flourishing. Have you witnessed that kind of dynamic where there are still places in the world where they get family right, they get faith right, where Christ and the church is at the center, and you begin to see kind of that natural flourishing that you were describing?
Oh man, that's the real life test case. Like, is it still possible? It's not just Europe, 1700, 1800 years ago. Mm-hmm. It not even just the early church and the Acts of the Apostles and the Holy Land. It's the truth of the human person. It's the eternal truth of the human person, which means it's always going to have purchase in society. Whatever society that is, it's going to keep working. You put Christ first, the Christocentric view of the human person, of society. That's what the church offers to the world. So yeah, we do see that. I should say, when I was traveling internationally, I'm not doing that these days, but when I was out there, the strongest places we saw it, there was a cardinal in Tanzania who, he was still in office until a few years ago. I wasn't tracking these things as closely as I was when I was working out there. But he was talking about how he had a chance to build something like 80 churches during his tenure. We went to some of the churches in Uganda and Tanzania, somewhat to in Latin America, but the ones we went to in Latin America looked like they could have been 1980s Arizona. You know, like there was that kind of faithful people doing their best. They didn't without a big, you know, world vision to understand what has already changed underneath their feet. You know, so faithful people doing their best. So in Africa, you see the church alive. It's a lot like the early church. You know, no resources. What's that going to do? How's that going to stop us, right? We're under attack half the time. But there's no stable institutions of civil society. As a matter of fact, the church is often the first institution of civil society around which you can actually build something that can be sustainable, because people's hearts and minds are given to this notion of loving self-sacrifice that makes them want to build and give and charity and love and actually start a little economy, you know. So that is happening. Yeah, that's happening in Africa. Tanzania was an enormous case because you had a faithful shepherd who, when you have a faithful shepherd, stuff happens. Yeah, you know, when the bishop is just doing his job and not focusing on, I don't want to get in that commentary a whole lot, but not doing the sort of airport thing, and when he's actually being a shepherd, you know, and he sees things that he knows from his tradition, from his training, and he can see the needs and he can offer those up in prayer. And then he starts doing things too. And lo and behold, people show up. Hearts are changed. And then they can be delegated and trusted with other things. And they can bring the word out. And they can build the things that are happening. They can build the church. They can recognize that you actually need a strong charitable presence here. Because for whatever reason, this particular situation, which is never going to be like any other situation, you have these these geographic factors, these other religions nearby, which may or may not be hostile, animists, Islamic things. So like every situation is different, but a faithful shepherd can create an environment through his own prayer, through his own example, through the way he delegates, because he can't do it all, an environment where the church can grow, like the apostles did in the early church. So that's a dynamic of the church that's still there. And when it's happening in a huge way. These churches in Africa are enormous. People walk for half a day just to get to church. And if you're there, by the way, it's a big deal. So that homily is you're gonna be there for a while.
And not to waste the opportunity.
Exactly. Like that's the show.
Get your money's worth if you walked half a day.
Exactly. And I was at one of these masses and the homily was long. Are we still at mass? Because it was like this huge outdoor venue. They didn't have a real church yet. So it was like sort of a concert venue of probably, I'd say a good 1,800 people.
Wow.
Families coming and going. And I was like, but people really, I'm not saying obviously that they understand, for example, Catholic social doctrine. They're just doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, of course they've got 8 kids. And there's chaos. There's real preaching. They're very serious about the Eucharist. The singing was extraordinary. You won't hear it in traditional circles.
Right.
No, to impose the traditional, the beautiful traditions of the church that you and I love, there would be really weird and alien. So they have their own sort of evolution of sacred music happening in a way. I remember I was at one place in Uganda, another outside church, and I was brought to tears by this powerful, like 3-part harmony, like no songbooks, everybody sang, and it was just like a rock show of beautiful hearts focused on Christ.
Yeah, praise God.
So is that happening? Absolutely. It's where the church is alive. It's not where, again, how much advice are we getting from powers in the church that are coming and giving very strong advice to the church that have no vocations? They're closing churches. They're closing schools. Yeah. And here's how we did it. Why don't you try this too? Like,
right.
No, let's not do that. Yeah. Where's the church alive? In America right now, it looks a lot like the very traditional, you get 15 passenger vans outside. And like there's certain marks of the living church in America as it's taking shape. In Africa, it's got a little bit of a different shape, obviously, but Latin America, the same thing. France is coming back somehow. Have you seen this? Like there's a traditional, they've, in a certain place, a few certain places with certain shepherds, they're having booming vocations in France.
Beautiful.
So yes, it's very much still happening, and it is beautiful to behold. But it actually changes us, and it changes the way we interact with the world, and we don't really have that Lambeth attitude.
Yeah.
What I call the Lambeth caucus, where we see the one authority we will not challenge is the New York Times op-ed page. Like our job is just to blend in with the elites and kind of make the church conform. We'll have synods and we'll talk about things until that part of the world likes us. Yeah. Like that's, as Anscombe would say, actually she wouldn't say this, I'd stolen her concept. The direction of fit there is backwards. The church lives in a direction of fit where we bring Christ to the world. We want to transform the world. That's our direction of fit. Yep. The Lambeth Caucus believes it's the other way around. The church has to change to fit the institutions of the world.
Yeah, I remember Father John Riccardo, who's just one of my favorite preachers,
It's fantastic.
talking about the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, and he said, we mistake that for thinking that, well, that means that hell will never conquer the church. But he said no. He said the gates of hell. Who's ever been attacked by a gate? A gate is there to keep the enemy out. What he's saying is that the church is going to conquer hell. That's a church on the march. That's a church, as Chesterton says, terrible as an army with banners. Like that's a church on the offensive, on the attack. Amen. That model you just said of bringing Christ into the world, of evangelizing, of preaching, of challenging the culture where it needs to be challenged. Chesterton again, we don't want a church that's right where we're right and wrong where we're wrong. We want a church that's right where we're wrong, that's going to challenge us. What do you see as, what does the church have to offer? As we both know, we live in a culture that has largely concluded, and our culture here in the United States, Western Europe, has largely concluded religion had its day. The most charitable take is it's a historical period, marked by certain shenanigans like the Inquisition and the Crusades. But, for its time, it was probably fairly useful. Christopher Hitchens used to have that delightful, damning with faint praise, backhanded compliment of saying, well, religion was our first attempt at everything. It was our first attempt at civilization and culture and education and art, meaning, okay, we've outgrown it, but let's just give it its due. But a culture which largely just says religion, and when we say organized religion, read here the Catholic Church, which is still the standard bearer for organized religion, really has no place in contemporary culture, and most certainly should have no voice in the public conversation. Pushing back against that perspective, what does the Catholic Church have to offer this culture?
Easy questions tonight.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's right.
I appreciate
yeah.
that. That's
only the simple short answer. Multiple choice.
yeah, man. If it wasn't for these shoulders we have to stand on, right?
Amen. Yeah.
I not to stand on these shoulders, but to give another atheist props for a good line. Alex O'Connor.
Yeah.
He's sort of the kid who's working those circles now. Really talented guy. Really wrong in his commitments, but really good at doing the atheist thing. He has this great line about how Islam is like the high T religion, high testosterone. It's like it's there to fight. It's going to cut your head off if you don't believe. So it's very masculine, high T, right? Whereas Anglicanism, where his home nation is like the high tea religion. At 2:00 in the afternoon, we have our tea. It's hot. So thank God for the atheists and their great lines, and for the chance that they give us to sort of, sharpen our own swords and get at it.
Right. Absolutely.
So, what does the church have to offer? It sounds like a trope, but it's true. It's really just Jesus, like ultimately, and hearts transformed by him. Like what Saint Augustine, that line that just makes everybody wonder what he meant, like love and do what you're going to do, basically, to paraphrase. A heart transformed in Christ, in his love, in charity, what we call, authentically charity, where you love others for God. And you love the person as perfectly as you're going to get. This great mix of agape, eros that Pope Benedict talks about in Deus Caritas Est, in that great document. That is what the world really needs most from the church. And it's going to look different everywhere else. Like the person transformed in Christ doesn't need sheet music to go into society. They can work in a bank. They can work in an international development agency. Augustine didn't mean like you can turn against God. He meant that once a person is formed that way, they can be sort of unleashed.
Yeah.
And then you have what you have, for example, and this, again, we're now in an apostolic age. I love that framing that they do, Monsignor Shea and the folks who wrote that. We're in an apostolic age. The church needs to go apostolic. We need to stop pretending like the structures that we inherited in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, 90s, when we were kind of moving up in the 2000s. We got to stop assuming that those things are still intact.
That's right.
They're not.
Yep.
If you're not really rethinking, for example, international development, you don't get it. You really don't get it. And you need to look both at the ancient traditions of the church and what is working today. The person who today is still so in love with Christ that he doesn't need somebody to tell him, much less a USAID contract or anything else, but like, here's what this place needs. Somebody we both know, Jeremy Beer, just published a book on the Franciscan missionary Garces, somebody that nobody knows about. Like, I've never heard of him.
Yeah.
He, Padre Quino, built San Javier del Bac down by Tucson. Obviously on the West Coast, you had Sarah. What did they do? How do you know they were there? Missions. They didn't just show up and say, hey, build this for me. They said, they learned the language. We have to learn the language again. We have to learn the language around us. We can't pretend, we can't live in a box and pretend like it's not happening. Okay, once you learn the language, I love you so much, I have to tell you the truth. This is how it's going. This is who Jesus Christ is.
Yeah.
This is why I'm here. And this is what he means to you. You who are my brother already in the image of God, but who can be my brother in Christ. And they start gathering friends and talking to each other. Well, look at this. This guy lives differently. You can tell when somebody's on fire for Christ that they're just
Right.
living differently.
Right.
That's really what the world needs, people on fire. And around them, you can start, and this is actually, we're talking about it like Keno down by Tucson, Garces throughout the whole Southwest, even connecting, finding ways back and forth to California and Syrah. God can do a lot with hearts on fire, and it's going to look different every place. We need that same spirit of like, realize we're in hostile territory. Let's stop pretending we're not. Let's learn the language and transform it. The direction of fit with Christ to the world, Christ transforming the world. And not the direction of fit where the church has to sort of bend to whatever the elites say is the fashion today. What do we believe? Let's look at Twitter, 8:00 every morning. Oh, I got a new enemy. I liked him yesterday, but now I hate him.
Yeah.
Oh, she's evil. I know I loved her yesterday, but it's like the peak secularism has shown us a human person that is infinitely programmable.
Mm-hmm.
Infinitely, immediately moldable to whatever the daily fashion is. Mm-hmm. I don't know has that ever happened before. I mean, you're a better student of history than I am, but
yeah, not in this way.
Digitally, electronically, the human person, not so completely open to the Holy Spirit, but so completely open to the spirit of the world, to the zeitgeist.
Yeah,
that whoever narrates it for them, whoever they've picked as their authority, can flip them in a day.
Yeah,
that's why I think you're like. The conversions we're seeing here, all these sort of pop celebrity atheists dipping their toe in Eastern Christianity and Catholicism, like the more liturgical traditions, by the way, where there's something so weird, so different that no, they can't find it.
Yeah,
at Starbucks.
That's right.
We're not trying to blend into something that's still amenable to 1970s contemporary music, the most oxymoronic term. Contemporary music is not contemporary anymore. It's not with the times. So they want something different. Something weird might attract them, but it's got to be something true.
Yeah.
Or they're going to keep bouncing along to the next thing that catches their fancy. That's what the world needs.
Yeah.
Loving, fearless, honest, weird, liturgical, ready to go out into the world. Deus Caritas Est, 14, where Pope Benedict says, the Eucharist that does not pass into, I'm going to mess up the quote, but the Eucharist that does not pass into like the horizontal to the love of our neighbor is intrinsically fragmented. We go to him first, always the vertical first. He transforms us, then we can go horizontal in an authentic way for the church.
Yeah.
We skipped it. We skipped the vertical, and we're another NGO.
That's right.
Those are the things we need to build. Those are the ways we need to approach in real life our neighbors, whether or not they're with us. And God's going to do things we can't do.
Preach, brother. Preach. I love it. I love it. Amen. All right. Steve Phelan, it has been an absolute blessing to chat with you.
Likewise. I'm glad you asked. Thank you for having me on.
I appreciate the perspective and the insight. As we wrap up here, tell folks what you do now, because you've got a cool position and a cool organization you work for these days as well.
Yeah, I get to help a lot of good groups actually with AmPhil, fundraising consultancy, and the range of things we're involved in, really helping build the institutions of civil society of America, the things that are under so much attack from the new and old statist assumptions where the government has to save us. No, it's we are the ones, our churches, our halls, our neighborhoods, our everything else, the things that build community. Those are the things that really need enlivening defense, or in our case, like a lot of times help just mission fundraising, things like that. So it's,
where can folks find it?
amphil.com, amphil.com. I'm a cog in that wheel, but it's a great wheel. and we get to work with so many good folks. My coworkers, a lot of smart and very on fire people. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. All right. Well, we'll have to do this again. There's still a lot more to talk about, but in the meantime, yeah, God bless and thanks for being part of the.
Feel the same way. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Rational. Yep.
Thanks for having me. My better Steve on this app.
No, on the contrary, we're a mutual
we'll
admiration
be here all night,
society.
Man. No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching Reasonably Rational. In your kindness, it would be so great if you would like, share, and subscribe. That way we can keep growing the podcast, bring on more great guests and more great topics. Until next time, God bless. We'll see you again soon.